Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Linux and Open Source News Show, where we discuss everything that happened in the Linux open source world, but also in the privacy and open web spaces. So first, the US Department of Justice is suing Apple because they are very clearly abusing their dominant position with iOS, at least in the US. We also have the release of GNOME 46 this week, and we have a bit of a problem for KDE global themes and widgets, which apparently can run arbitrary code and can wipe your entire hard drive if they decide to do so. And we also have some more scam apps coming to the Snap Store. We have another Switch emulator being taken down, sort of, and we also have this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Proton Mail. You probably all know about it, but if you don't, it's your private, zero access and end-to-end encrypted email service that also comes with a calendar, online storage, a password manager, and a VPN. Proton Mail has all the features you need to block email trackers and ensure your communications stay private. And they even have a brand new desktop app available for Windows, macOS, and also Linux. The app integrates with your system with native notifications and dark mode support, and it has all the privacy and productivity features of Proton Mail. Using the desktop app of Proton Mail also means you're not subjected to the potential privacy invasive features of third-party clients like Outlook sharing your data with Microsoft's partners even if you don't use a Microsoft email account. Your free Proton Mail account lets you try out the desktop app for 14 days, and if you need more features or more storage and you go with a paid plan, then you will get complete access to the app. So click the link in the description and get started with Proton Mail. So it looks like the US wants to take a page out of the EU's book as they decided to sue Apple for anti-competitive practices. The Department of Justice claims that Apple took advantage of their dominant position, of their ecosystem, and of their monopoly to extract more money from developers and consumers. And that instead of trying to compete fairly with other innovations, they instead imposed a series of rules and restrictions in their App Store and platform, including blocking cross-platform messaging apps, limiting wallet and smartwatch features on other platforms, and disrupting game streaming services and various other apps that just didn't want to appear in the App Store. Basically, the main complaint is that Apple implemented barriers to leaving their platform instead of competing fairly on price and features, locking users in, and, according to the DOJ, smothering an entire industry. Of course, Apple isn't having any of it. They're saying the lawsuit threatens their identity and that their policies are crucial to keeping their devices secure and private, which is sort of nonsense because most of the policies in question have nothing to do with security or privacy. Now we'll have to see if the US has the same capacity as the EU to regulate Apple and to make them a bit more open to third-party apps and services. In the US, Apple's market share is way higher than in the rest of the world as well. Apparently, iPhones occupy 60% of the smartphone market in the US compared to the rest of the world where Android has 70% market share. So it's even more important to make sure Apple plays fair in the US. And one might argue that iPhone doesn't have a monopoly, but the monopoly here is the App Store. You cannot distribute an application on the whole iOS platform without using the App Store. Thus, Apple has a monopoly on app distribution on iOS, which holds a dominant position in the US with its 60% market share. There's just no going around this. And if we consider the smartphone market as a whole, Apple does indeed have some barriers erected for people who currently use Apple software or Apple devices that would like to move to Android, because most of their hardware doesn't really work well with Android, most of their cloud services or services in general don't really work well on Android, and Android manufacturers and developers also do not have the same capabilities that Apple is giving themselves on iOS, meaning that Apple does give themselves an unfair competitive advantage on their own platform, which is abusing their dominant position. Now, of course, this week GNOME 46 was released. I covered it in detail in a dedicated video on this exact YouTube channel, so go check that one out if you want to learn more about it. But the TLDR version is It is a transition release. It doesn't have tons of new features, but there are a few cool things in there. like better notifications that you can collapse or expand, experimental variable refresh rate support, Nautilus finally letting you click on the path bar to edit the location, verified badges for FlatHub apps in GNOME software, a few revamped and changed settings, and improved fractional scaling, notably when rendering fonts. Most default apps also received updates, Nautilus being the focus here with a new file transfer progress bar, new options to display dates for files, an easier way to change folder icons, and global search by default with a new button for searching only the current folder. Most of the really cool stuff will come for GNOME 47 and 48 though, with a lot more being currently worked on to improve notifications further, to have a solid accessibility framework, to have home directory encryption, to make background apps actually actionable like there were system tray elements, and more. So GNOME 46 is worth the upgrade. Of course, if your distro offers it, you should update it provided it doesn't break any extension that you might rely upon. But what's really exciting is what's coming to the future versions, 47 and 48. GNOME 46 just laid the foundations for these two releases. Now, on the Plasma front, there's apparently a big problem in Plasma 6, but it probably also exists in 5.27, when you're installing global themes or even just widgets in general. It looks like these are able to run a bunch of scripts in the background, and one of these themes seemed to trigger the execution of the infamous rm-rf/ command, which will wipe everything on your hard drive, or at least everything that you have the permissions to remove as the current user. The theme in question was removed from the KDE store, but there might be others that do the same thing. It apparently wasn't intentional or malicious, it was an error in how the script was parsed. But it definitely means that any other theme could do the same thing, maliciously or otherwise. And it also means that there's some work to do to have better quality control in the get new stuff part of KDE. Because people could definitely make something malicious that voluntarily deletes everything. The main issue is that global themes or widgets aren't just a collection of plugins and themes and layout files. They can actually run any type of command, which is obviously a pretty big security risk. Now, the KDE team is of course aware of the issue, but for now they're just warning you from trying to download anything from this. It's at your own risk. The real problem is, why is that even possible? Why does a widget or a global theme need to run commands? Why isn't it just a JSON file listing all the resources it needs and then just KDE applying all those resources? It's kind of weird. Now, I already reported on the Scam Crypto wallet app that appeared on the Snap Store, but this time it is worse. At least 10 new apps with the exact same scammy purposes were now reported in the same Snap Store. They were all published by the same developer called Digital Safe, and they were called things like TronLink, Uniswap, Jax Liberty, Avalanche, Trust Wallet, Electrum, and Exodus again, which I'm assuming are all real names of real wallets. Now, they were promptly all removed, but then they popped up again right after with another account called Code Shield, and Alan Pope, who reported these 10 apps at first, reported these again. The apps apparently do not let you create a new wallet, obviously because they want you to add an existing one so they can siphon everything that's in it. They're all just a wrapper for a web view, and so they can be sandboxed without triggering a human review on the Snap Store. Now, as Alan Pope says, it is trivial to keep pushing those apps as they get removed. You just need another email account and you can just publish everything. There's no manual review. Everything goes directly onto the Snap Store and onto the eyes of millions of Ubuntu users using the default Ubuntu store. Canonical needs to address this right now. There's been discussions on how do you secure the Snap Store. Right now, you need to take a stance on just removing everything crypto related until you figure out something else. Now, there are bad news for a lot of apps that depend on location services on Linux. Mozilla announced that they would shut down access to their Mozilla Location Services, or MLS. This is used by the freedesktop.org location framework, by GNOME Maps, GNOME Weather, and a lot of other applications. And they will have to find something else before June 12th, where all third-party API keys will be removed for that service. This is apparently part of the cuts made by Mozilla's new CEO. And the main reason is also that Mozilla had to settle a patent infringement lawsuit in 2019, meaning that they really could not invest or update or probably even exploit that service commercially. It's not the end of the world for apps that depend on it. Most of them will support detecting your location through your IP, but it's not as precise. For something really accurate, the only proposed option right now seems to be Google location services. Which, well, you better not, because using something from Google by default in a desktop environment, an application, or Linux distro is just no good. Like, a lot of people use Linux because it's more private. If you slot in Google services inside that, then automatically you're backstabbing a lot of the community. You do not add Google services by default onto a Linux distro, please. Now, Phoronix has an interesting article about the Mesa drivers, pointing out how the project has evolved from mostly a reverse engineering effort, mostly for community purposes, to a complete repo of drivers and the main way for companies to push their graphics drivers to the Linux community in general. Performance is now on par with what you can expect in Windows, or even surpasses that in some cases. But this all comes with more responsibilities and more work for Mesa developers and maintainers. For example, a recent merge request reverted a change made to Mesa to force Mesa to stick to an older version of zlib, because moving to a newer one would break a specific graphics benchmark that a lot of hardware vendors use. Now, the issue doesn't lie with Mesa, it's the benchmark itself, because it relies on an older version that should probably not be used anymore, and it's also not being distributed in a way that would remove this dependency problem. For example, if they shipped their own version of zlib in a Flatpak or an app image. But in the end, Mesa had to accept to rely on the older version of the library, because if the benchmark didn't work, then some companies contributing to Mesa would prefer moving to something closed source that works exactly how they want it and that supports everything that they want. As Mesa developers point out, it is not a technical issue, it is a political issue. You cannot decide that something that the industry relies upon will not work anymore because this thing refuses to update their own dependencies. It would in the end hurt Mesa's reputation, not the benchmarks, and it would make it look inflexible and unsuitable to its partners that create hardware and the drivers that go with it. Now, this is just one example, but it perfectly illustrates the problem you get once you get big in the Linux and open source community and companies start getting involved. On the one hand, it's great because it provides you with a bunch of jobs, a bunch of opportunities, a bunch of funding, and more support. But on the other hand, if you don't cave in to the corporate demands, then you will lose access to all that funding and all those jobs because they will decide they just don't want to work with you anymore. And in the end, you will hurt your project. So focusing on the technical purity in some cases is not the right answer. But also you need to sometimes take that stance because if not, you're just losing control of your project. Now, in this specific case, I think they made the right call because a driver's job is to run applications, even if the application is badly written or badly packaged. Graphics drivers very often have game-specific fixes because games are just not written realistically well for those drivers or for a specific graphics API, so why not do the same for a benchmark? And speaking of gaming, we have a few things to cover. First is Suyu. It was the first fork of Yuzu that became available. It is non-profit and it doesn't accept donations of any kind to try and deter Nintendo's lawyers. And it comes with a few new features compared to Yuzu. And, well, it's already been taken down by GitLab after a DMCA takedown notice from an unknown source was sent. But yeah, it was very likely Nintendo. Since the project was based on something that was already taken down, there was no arguing or discussion and Suyu was instantly removed. Of course, the code is still around, it is available in a self-hosted Git repo, at least for the moment, but the project will have to be relatively stealthy, which will be pretty hard for an emulator like this. We're talking about the internet not sharing something that they use, that just seems impossible, but thanks Nintendo, you still suck. Now, FSR 3.1 was also announced this week to upscale your games even more smoothly. It promises less flickering and blurriness around objects in motion, and it will reduce ghosting and it will better preserve details. Plus, the frame generation features are no longer linked to the upscaling features, meaning you could use the DLSS frame generation to get to 60 FPS in a game, all while using FSR instead of NVIDIA's DLSS for upscaling the resolution. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart will support it, and judging from a little animation they shared, it does look much better with moving objects. Other games that will jump on that new version are Cyberpunk, Dying Light 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and Space Marine 2. And I really like these upscaling technologies because not only do they make sure that you use less resources and you can still get a very nice graphical result, but it also means you generally have to change your GPU way less often because as these technologies mature, your old GPU is still able to render at something that looks high-res but really isn't. Now what's a good thing for you Linux users is the segue to our sponsor. The people at Tuxedo Computers make devices that run with Linux out of the box. And if you're wondering why you should care about this, well, first, you don't really have to bother with trying to look online and see if a potential PC you're interested in works with Linux, because if you buy from Tuxedo, it works. And also, you're supporting a company that actively supports Linux, because they submit patches upstream when they detect problems with their hardware, and in the meantime, while these patches get accepted, they have a repo that you can use to apply those patches to your devices as well. They have a big range of devices that will fit any needs and any price point, whether you're looking for a desktop or a laptop, something for office work, something for gaming, or a higher-end workstation. They have it all. All the laptops can be opened, repaired, and upgraded. You can have your own custom keyboard layout for the laptop, you can have your own logo engraved on the lid, and you have a wide choice of parts for the SSD, the RAM, sometimes the CPU, and the GPU as well. So if you need a new computer, you want to use Linux on it, you want to make sure Linux runs well, and you want to support a company that actually supports Linux, click the link in the description below and get yourself a computer from Tuxedo. They're really, really good. So thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, or to write a comment. And if you really enjoy the channel, there are plenty of ways to support it down in the description as well. If you become a Patreon member or a YouTube member, you'll get access to a daily Linux and open source news show from Monday to Friday. So thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!